So, ladies and gentlemen, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. So, welcome back to the ISITIA 2021, and I am Martandi, and I will be your MC for today's event. So, after the first and second keynote speeches yesterday, we will have the third and fourth keynote speeches this morning. Just for your information, that today ISITIA is organized and held online with the committee being in separated place due to tight restriction in Indonesia. At this occasion, we would like also to remind you to stay safe and sound and keep your mask and distance if you are outside. So today we will have the keynote speeches from Dr. Adi Dharmawibawa from Institute Teknologi 10 November and Professor Xiang Huayu from National Sun Yat-sen University. And after the break, we will have Dr. Muhammad Rizky Utama Saputra from Jakarta Smart City, invited by IEEE ITS student branch. So for this session, we will have Dr. Engineering Ardiono Priyadi from Department of Electrical Engineering ITS as the moderator. So good afternoon, Dr. Ardiono Priyadi. How are you? Are you ready for today?
Okay. Thank you.
For today, its keynote speech, we'll have 30 minutes for presentation part and 15 minutes for Q&A or question and answer part. And the audience can ask the question via chat or YouTube comment section or use the raise hand feature in the Zoom chat during the Q&A session. So, ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome Dr. Adi Dharmawibawa, Professor Xiang Huayu, and Dr. Engineering Ardiono Priyadi for today's event.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, Honorable Professor Yu, and Honorable Dr. Adi. So, to make the punctual time, so I will invite the first speaker in the session. So now is the agenda is Dr. Adi Dharmawibawa. So before I invited him to present his research about the system telemedicine as key aspect in the pandemic era for healthcare improvement, a case study of subject-specific stroke rehabilitation system in the new era. So I will read the short brief about his biography. Dr. Adi Dharmawibawa, he graduated from ITS Surabaya in 2000 and 2006 respectively for bachelor and master degree. And in 2007, he joined in the Polytechnic Elektronika Negeri Surabaya. Then he continued, joined to ITS in 2008. Then he pursued PhD degree in 2014 in the Groningen, Netherlands. Then he continued in ITS with research interest. So his research focuses on the biomedical signal processing and artificial intelligence application. So please applause to Dr. Adi Wibawa. Okay, then we continue to Dr. Adi Wibawa. The time is yours.
Good morning, everyone. Can everybody hear my audio?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Thank you, Mr. Moderator, Dr. Ardiono. Good morning, Professor Yu. Welcome to Surabaya. The second time for you to visit Surabaya, but this time you visited virtually.
Virtually.
Yeah. So it's glad to have you here in our seminar, and I'm sorry I have to give the speech in the first schedule because that is has been arranged by the committee. Okay, today speech will be. I will try to share my screen. So is it already clearly seen, Mr. Ardiano?
Okay.
Yeah, okay.
Clear.
So I'm gonna have a 30 minutes, so that is not long. So I will try to make it as efficient as possible, and then we can continue to the discussions. But regarding the participants, mostly are students. So maybe I will talk about a bit basics in this sessions. Um, uh, in these presentations, we have five outlines. The first is the needs of innovation in healthcare due to pandemics. The second is one of the innovations is in the form of telemedicines. And in this presentation, I take a study case for stroke rehabilitation program. And then continued by the what is stroke and how do we do the EEG signal processing, and then some case study our research result based on subject specific stroke rehabilitation system. So previously in the last 3 years we performed some research with master students regarding the subject specific stroke rehabilitation system. And then for the last outlines, we would like to introduce our system. So we are now in the process of making this system so that we can really implement telemedicines, especially on the stroke rehabilitation program. So this is the introductions. I will have to, sorry. Yeah, this is the introductions. Nowadays, we have pandemic situations that hits everyone's in the world. Even just now, Professor Yu told us that he just got the first shot and it doesn't feel good, Professor Yu. So me too, I got the second shot about 2 weeks ago. And I just finished from the following the effects of the vaccinations. Maybe just 2 days ago, I just feel fresh because before I feel the same. However, we have to deal with this pandemics, even though this pandemic has been changed human behavior. Now we have many regulations, many restrictions. Yeah. Especially for people who have to work on the field or they have to work manually, it's really a problem. Because now, for example, in Surabaya, now as Dr. Roni told us that even now there is a restrictions that we cannot do a travel out of town, or we cannot do a travel out of the city because government concerned about if we are also spreading the virus. So this is a really hard situation for all of us. And then COVID also, this pandemic also forced hospital and clinicians to think hard, yeah, to find solutions and innovations because this situation really creates many complex problems. I will show you in the second slide. This is a study done by Accenture. He released some results. One of them I presented in these presentations that 70% of patients now they cancel the treatments due to COVID. So I think they are afraid of being infected by the COVID pandemics when they go to the hospital. 1 in 10 canceled of 1 in 10 canceled all elements of their treatments. However, fewer oncology patients canceled all treatments. So in the right side, we see that The reasons for the patients cancel the treatment is because they could not get the provider office due to transportation issue, because many restrictions. So then the transportation is becoming an issue. Yeah, and then more important, to avoid possible exposure to COVID. So they are afraid to be infected by the COVID when they go to the hospital. These situations, I think, also happen the same in Surabaya, in Indonesia. On the picture, this is a real picture we took from the public hospital in Surabaya. So when we see there are many patients, actually this is not the hospital. This is the how to call it, the hall before the entrance, because the entrance is on the glass door you see at the corner. So this is not the hospital yet, but we can see that people has been crowded to enter the hospital, and they are already infected by the COVID-19. So this is a really hard situations that we face now. All non-COVID patients must be tested before visiting the hospital. So that is the regulations that we apply in Surabaya. So sometimes a patient need to think twice, because if they need to go to the hospital, they will have to provide a healthy swab test. And if the swab test is not healthy, or if it is positive, then they will have to face the second problem. They will have to do the isolation, just like Professor you said, that, for travelers. And in isolations is creating another problem, because some of the patients, they are very dependent on other people. They could not walk or move by their own self, so they need somebody else to help. If finally after the swab test, and then they are obliged to do the isolation and living with their own, then it means like they have another problem. So they try to avoid one problem, but they will have to face another problem. So it's really a complicated a problem we have nowadays. Most of non-COVID patient tends to avoid coming to the hospital, and then they postpone the visits. Then of course they do something positive in terms of social distancing, because then they don't gather with many patients in hospital. That's good, yeah. But regarding their chronic disease or their illness before the pandemics, then that could be worse, because then they stop the treatment, they stop the medication control, they stop to visit the doctors. So then that is another problem. So that is a really complicated. So in this situation, then I think we have to take into consideration how then we solve this problem. Of course, it is not easy to solve all the problems, but at least in this presentation, we would like to present some tiny idea or tiny solution for this complex problem that we are having now. For the many studies suggested that some therapies and rehabilitation techniques for some patients should be taught at home, or should be trained at home for home care therapy. So in the fourth point that we mentioned here, so that from that point, then we came up into telemedicine's technique. So what is telemedicine? As a basic definitions, I took this from the WHO definitions of telemedicines. Uh, uh, Due to those complex situations, then we came up with an idea of how, if we implement telemedicines to help the quality of the healthcare service for the people. So before we do that, so we will discuss what is telemedicine. Telemedicine is actually an old term. First time it is introduced in 1970, which literally means healing at the distance. Because of the pandemic, we have to do a social distancing. So I think that the idea of telemedicine is now makes sense, and people really need these telemedicines. Nowadays, many doctors, I see that they still do a clinician practices by serving the patient privately at home, but by using technology. So most of them now using WhatsApp video call or even Zoom video meeting, so then they still can have uh, visual contacts with the conditions of their patients. And if, for example, it is something that can be seen by the doctors, then it will be easier if they perform the consultations by using telemedicines. But if we discuss about the telemedicines, WHO define it even broader than the first term. The first time it is released. WHO defined the telemedicines even as the delivery of healthcare services where distance is a critical factor by all healthcare professionals using ICT technologies for the exchange of valid information for diagnosis, treatment, preventions of disease and injuries, research and evaluations. So even if we do a research in order to provide or in order to plan a telemedicine implementation, that could also be included as telemedicines. For the continuing education of healthcare provider, all in the interest of advancing the health of individuals and their communities. So even for the definition defined by the WHO, the means of telemedicine is very broad. As the background of this study that I would like to present today, because of the internet technology and the pandemic situations, so these two aspects now then bringing us to telemedicine's concepts, telemedicine's era, which is we have to implement it, not just study it. So that's what makes these presentations. And but regarding the topics, I choose a stroke in these research presentations because of some background. Why strokes? Because stroke is reported has been the second cause of death in the world. Yeah, this is the annual reports in 2019, and stroke is the first cause of death in Indonesia. So I just knew it because I thought the first cause of death is heart attack or cardiovascular disease. But in 2019 report, stroke is the first cause of death in Indonesia. Billions of dollars has been spent to cure and treat the stroke patients so 2.6 billion US dollar is in Indonesia alone. So that is not from other countries. So it's really need a lot of money to cover the stroke patient. These are some facts about strokes. The first is the second cause of death and permanent disabilities. And in Indonesia, this is the first cause of death. The prevalence is also increasing year by year. And we present also the financial spend in trillion, that is in Indonesia money. 2.5 is quite big money in Indonesia. The trillion, 2.5 trillion. And then we also reported from the World Stroke Organization survey that they stated that in 2020, 90% of stroke patients did not visit hospital due to COVID-19, as we discussed earlier. And this is some background about strokes in global. So globally, there are over 13.7 million people have a new stroke every year. So that's every year. That's quite a lot. 1 in 4 people over age 25 will have a stroke in their lifetime. So 1 in 4 people. So we have to choose in this class. So we hope that we are not in that 25% of that 4 persons. And then 10% of the people currently living who have experienced a stroke are under the age of 44. So 10% people who get a stroke attacks now they tend to be younger and younger. So it's under the 44. So in this case, I think I am already free because I'm now 45, Prof. You. So I'm not in that 10% of people living in currently. And 52% of all strokes each year occur in men. So from the 13.7 million strokes each year, approximately half of them are men. So that's quite scary, actually, when we discuss about the stroke. And there are over 80 million people now currently having a strokes attacks nowadays. So every year we will add up with 13.7 million. So next year we will gonna have like 9.3 million. In the next 2 years, we're going to have like 100 millions. So it's going add up and add up every year. However, stroke patients have another problem in the pandemic, just like what we discussed earlier. Yeah, many stroke patients did not visit the hospital for rehabilitation or medications. So that will bring us to think then how can we rehabilitate them from their house. So then how can we make an innovations to make them to stay at home, but they still can do the rehabilitations at home. So this is some introductions of strokes. Stroke is a situation where the blood vessels in the brain ruptures and bleed, or when there is a blockage in the blood supply to the brain. Yeah, the rupture or blockage prevent blood and oxygens from reaching the brain parts. This condition then causing the brain to damage. When the brain damaged, it can cause another problems such as motor control, speaking, memorizing, and unbalance in locomotions. So many problems then can be caused by the stroke attacks. These are the basics of stroke symptoms that maybe we have to understand so that we can try to avoid. Yeah. The first is paralysis. Yeah, it's you can say you cannot control of your body. Yeah, and then numbness. Yeah, trouble in speaking. Yeah, confusion, slurring speech. In Indonesia, we call it cadel or pelat. Suddenly, then you become a cadel. Yeah. Some people have vision problems, trouble in walking, loss in coordinations, yeah, dizziness, and severe sudden headaches with unknown case. So these are the symptoms that strokes may struck human. We have a short video. This is showing how the patients of stroke is treated in hospital. So every day in a normal situation, they need to come to hospital for the rehabilitations and treatment. You can see that these patients is difficult in lifting his left hand because of the stroke has been damaged. The area of the brain that's control the left parts of the body. Yeah, okay. So then we can continue that in the literature, there are many studies previously that explore and understanding how the strokes happen and how the EEG technology can be used in stroke patients analysis. These are several articles. So this is the background of our studies. Why then we choose the EEG for stroke patients treatment. So EEG may be new to many students here. So this is just a brief introduction of what is EEG. EEG means electroencephalogram. Yeah, EEG is an electrical signal recorded from the scalp of the head. Yeah, if we apply specific electrodes to the head. Yeah, the EEG is very small electrical voltage ranging from minus 100 to plus 100 in microvolts. Yeah. So in terms of frequency, EEG had several subbands starting from delta, subbands, theta, subbands, alpha, beta, and gamma. Each subband has its own functions, as has been studied by previous researcher. For example, low beta wave, yeah, known as beta 1. When we are in focus, yeah, in calm situations, this low beta is transmitted from our heads actually. So if we put certain electrode to the scalp of the head, then this device then can record this beta activity. Mid-range beta, for example, is known as beta 2. Yeah, and this subband works mostly when we are in anxiety or performing something or concentrating. Yeah. For example, like nowadays, what I do, yeah, I think when you put EEG electrode on my scalp, on my head, I think you will get the mid-range beta wave coming out from my head because now I'm in the mode of performing something, yeah, and a bit anxiety, for example, maybe, and then so you can get that. And then also another functions of the EEG subband. So, for example, for deep sleeps, many people study in the subband alpha. For example, if you want to study deep sleeps, how can we understand the deep sleep? This is one of the examples of the use of EEG. Yeah, this device can be used to study many aspects in the human life, especially in the research. Yeah. For example, deep sleeps, dreams, hypnotherapy, brain injury, brain imaging. Yeah. For those who don't understand why do we need to study deep sleeps, yeah, if you don't understand deep sleep is a condition which is you sleep very well. So that is the definitions, the simple definitions of deep sleep. If you can sleep very well, then that is a deep sleep. In many studies, deep sleep is recorded by the EEG. Certain behavior of alpha subbands will show you when the deep sleeps happens. So in the applications, sometimes people, for example, if we want to test the use of, how to call it, a drug to make people sleep, I don't know, if before the operations, sometimes people need to be injected by some drugs so that when they go to deep sleep, then the doctor can continue with the operations. Yeah. In that situation, sometimes how do we know if this patient has already reached the deep sleeps? So the EEG is implemented in monitoring the deep sleep situation, whether it is happen or not. EEG is non-invasive. There is no clinical effect or no harm to a patient because if we see in the picture, so it's just an electrode that is placed on the scalp of the head. Yeah, it is easy to use because we just place it on the skins, yeah, of the head. But it's very prone to error because of the skin movements. Because sometimes eye movements or small movement of the skin can also give an electrical signal differently from the EEG signal should be. And EEG is electrical activity representing the brain activity. It is very good in visualizations, especially in temporal resolutions. We will see that further. this is just one example of a complete EEG channel. If you look at in the previous presentation, that there are many electrodes. For example, in the first image, each of the electrodes represents a specific area of the brain. So this image is representing each electrode signal. For example, FP2 is frontal electrode, so it's placed near the eye. Yeah, and then we have also O2. O2 means occipital, so O2 is in the back of how do you call it? In the back area of the eye, where you retrieve the light sensor, light, how do you call it? Light response. So O1 and O2 is placed in the back of the heads. How
I'm
do you call
sorry,
it?
Mr.
Line
Adi.
of sights of the eye.
I'm
Yeah.
sorry, Dr. Adi. 5 minutes.
5 minutes. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So that is one example. That is the backgrounds of why then we perform AEG analysis for stroke patients. And this is, we will introduce you the technology that we used in our labs. We implement open PCI site on boards, EEG electrodes. You can see the visualization is the device is like this, so we can see the how the electrode is placed on the heads. Yeah. With its characteristics, the frame rate is 256 hertz, which means in 1 second you get like 256 data frames. So the standard placements we implement in our study is international standard placement 10 to 10 system. So we can see like the image in this ABC placement standard. We can discuss this later. And then we perform some analysis. First, we try to differentiate. We try to see what is the difference between if you don't do any motions and you do a motion. So we just do a basic research by understanding how can EEG visualize the data. If, for example, somebody is performing emotions and in idle situations, and then we have the result. This is the examples of the EEG visualizations. This is the way we recorded the EEG recording. So we can see this is our labs, Professor Yu. So I think similar to what you have in Taiwan. So this is the EEG recording technique. The first is preparations and then relax, 10 seconds relaxing, and then performing finger motions and then grasping motion and then elbow flexion. So we did it for 11 healthy subjects. And then of course, we have to do signal processing, for example, for artifact removal and then the bandpass filter to get the EEG band. And then we have also need to do a band decompositions, for example, like subband filtering to get the frequency of alpha, beta, theta, and etc. And then we also do some segmentations in the data to get the clean data, and then we can do the analysis regarding the clean data. So this is the result of the first article. We have a hypothesis that actually how can EEG differentiate between motion and non-motions, and the result is we can see by using mean absolute value parameters, we can see the difference clearly. That in this first part of relax, you can see that the green lines is a bit not too dense compared to when they do a performance, fingers, grasping, and elbow. So for the first shot, so we finally success to make a difference between in motion or in non-motion. And this is another study. We try to identify the EEG parameter. I will move the image. we try to identify the EEG parameters to monitor the strokes. So we involved 10 stroke patients in our study, and then we try to compare how is the EEG describe the healthy hand movement and the affected hand movement. Because as we explained earlier, that stroke sometimes strikes people body parts separately, left side or hand or right side. So we try to compare how is the EEG can make a difference in the analytical data, and then the result is we can see that we do some data processing by analyzing several parameters and also several subbands, and we found this figure 4, for example, PSG, power spectral density, showing 69% as a good parameter to differentiate between the healthy hands and the affected hands. In terms of band frequency, we found that alpha band frequency can make it difference between the healthy and the affected hands. So another study we also performs. So we analyze the same data, but by applying different analysis, we segmented the data with 20 milliseconds length of data so that we can see a very small motion movement in the EEG signal. And then we found that among all of these, all of those statistical parameters like mean absolute value, standard deviation, variance, and mean value, we found that standard deviations can really describe the two conditions, the healthy hands and the affected hands. And then we did another study by monitoring, fully monitoring, 4 stroke patients that's performing the same rehabilitation programs. We call it a BOBAT rehabilitation program. So we monitor the patients while performing 2 months rehabilitation at home by using the same methods of rehabilitations. And we found again that uh, power spectral density, mean absolute value, and standard deviations is a good parameter to monitor the stroke progress after rehabilitations. And in terms of EEG subband, we also found alpha, beta low, and beta high is uh, properly subband to be used for monitoring stroke rehabilitations. And this is the result. Uh, we found alpha subband with PSD parameter and beta high with mean absolute value parameters as the best combinations to monitor the stroke rehabilitation. And then the last study we haven't published yet is we did the stroke severity classifications by using EEG statistical features. We involved 12 different stroke patients from the public hospital in Kediri, and we tried to classify the stroke severity by using the EEG statistical data. Of course, the patients is labeled by the doctors regarding the stroke severity, and then we try to analyze the statistical data resulting from the EEG. And then we found that mean absolute value, standard deviation, and variance are good parameters to classify the stroke severity. So from all of those results, then we develop a telemedicine system for stroke rehabilitations. This system is very simple. It consists only a computer, electrode of EEG, for example, ultra cortex that we just saw, and then applications that we install it in the computer so that it can automatically calculate the features for monitoring the progress of rehabilitations. This is the simple flow works regarding our system. This is the the applications that we can choose which subband to be analyzed and which channel that we need to take from the EEG data. And this is the visualizations of EEG subband, and then we continue with the statistical feature analysis from this, and then we save the data to the database online. Yeah. So in conclusions, EEG can be used to monitor the stroke rehabilitation program at home. Yeah. This innovation is applicable especially in this pandemic era. Statistical features such as standard deviation, mean absolute value, and power spectral density are able to be used as a key parameters for monitoring stroke rehabilitation, whereas the EEG subband to be used is alpha low, beta low, and beta high are recommended. Our system can be delivered to stroke patient at home for self-therapy and facilitating doctor to monitor the patient progress for recovery. Thank you. So I think that is the end of the slide, Mr. Ardiono.
Thank you, Dr. Adi. So we have 5 minutes remaining for discussion. So is there any question? This one is a nice presentation, and then this is I think is very good research. This is about our health actually. We still.
It needs some time for the students to.
Okay, so
to think of question, I think.
Yeah, we're still waiting the participant for yeah. Maybe there is a question from
yes,
participant.
Hello, Ardiono. May I have a question regarding this presentation?
Oh, okay. Please.
Yes, thank you. Dr. Adi, it is quite interesting of playing around with the very small signal from the human being. So my question is there any specific method to capture the very low signal here? Because if we are talking about the the brain signal, it will be in micro fault or something. Is there any specific method to obtain and to separate between the true signal and the noises? Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you for the question, Dr. Dedet. That's a good question. Actually, if we look at the history of the EEG, in back to 1825, a researcher from UK first initiated the study, and then continued by a researcher from Germany. Its a famous name is Hans Berger. In that era, when they do the measurements, they even they need to open the scalp. So it's a really how do you call it? It's hurt. So it's invasive because they need to slice the scalp and then they place the electrodes. So you can imagine how hard it is to do that. But nowadays, because of the technology of amplifying the signal, so now many industries, many technologies regarding the EEG electrodes now has been produced so that it will only need to be placed on the skins of the heads. Then the electrical activity, because of the brain's activity, then can be taken by those electrodes. Actually, there are many technologies regarding the electrodes, but the simple ones is the one that I just showed you. So it is built-in device with a plus, minus, and ground aspect. So before we can see that they use many cables because they need at least for one electrode they need 3 cables. One is for the positive signals, the other is for the negative, and then the third one is for the ground. So we can see if, for example, we place 3 electrodes, then it will need like 9 cables from the head. So, but with that technologies, because they make everything simple now, so they just put one electrodes, and then you can record it, the EEG. Of course, it is not automatically clean data, because there are many artifacts in that recorded data. So in that aspect, then the electrical engineers can work by filtering, and then performing a stop band filtering, and then analyzing the data. So that technology is not there yet. There is no device that really ready with the finished result, that the clean data of EEG can be obtained. We have to do that by ourselves.
Thank you very much, Brady.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for Dr. Degat for your question. That thank you also for Dr. Adi for your explanation. So since we should follow the next agenda, so I'm sorry. So we should end for this session. So again, thank you very much for nice presentation by Dr. Adi. Please give applause by, yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, so in the next section, so I will invite the speaker from, this is from Sun Yat-sen University, National Sun Yat-sen University. I think this, Professor Yu. He is my friend actually. So for a long time ago, so yes, maybe now he around the time I meet him. But unfortunately, today we meet by virtual, not by, Okay, so before I invite Professor Yu, so I will read the short biography of Professor Yu. So Professor Yu received MS and PhD degree in control engineering from National Chia Tung University, Hsinchu, Taiwan, in 1995 and 2001, respectively. And in 2004, he joined the faculty of National Sun Yat-sen University, Kaohsiung, Taiwan, where he is currently an associate professor of electrical engineering. His research focuses on relay feedback oscillation and its application on control, detection, and modulation. Now we invite the speaker, Honorable Professor Yu. Please give applause from Professor Yu. Now, Professor Yu, time is yours.
Thank you, Dr. Andrano. I'm so happy to be here. There are so many old friends. Can you see the slide?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you, everyone. I'm so glad to be here to bring a report of my research. I'm going to talk about a very special ultrasonic radar. It is called a self-injection lock radar. First, I want to talk about how a self-injection lock radar works. This novel radar was proposed by Dr. Wang and Professor Hong. And as you can see here, we have a very simple structure of the radar. First, we have the receiver and transmitter, and also an oscillator here. And this oscillator is made of a resonator, a very high Q narrow band bandpass filter in a positive feedback. And also we have a FM demodulator. We want to detect any change of the oscillation frequency. So how it works, we can see here. First, this oscillator will transmit a wave, and then the receiver receives the returned echo and inject it into this oscillator. And why do we want to do this kind of self-injection? We can see here, according to Doppler effect, we know that if this target object moves, then it will create some phase shift. This phase shift between the transmitted signal and the injected signal will change according to the movement of the target. And once we inject this return echo signal, we will find that its oscillation frequency and its oscillation amplitude will also change with the this phase difference. So that is how we to detect the movement of the target. And since we know that the oscillation frequency will change with the movement of the target, if we put a FM demodulator here to detect any change in the oscillation frequency, and then show the waveform of this frequency change, we will find that its waveform is very similar to the movement of the target. But if we look at more detail, how the oscillation frequency is related to the phase difference between the transmitted signal and the injected signal, we will find that it is described by an Adler equation. On the left-hand side of the equation is the frequency change. Omega n is the natural frequency of the resonator. That means that if this oscillator run without any injection, we will find its oscillation frequency will be omega n. But if we inject the return echo and there are some movement of the target, we will find that it will cause some phase shift. And this phase shift between these two signals will cause a change of the frequency. And it is described by this equation. If the phase difference is very small, then we will find that this equation can be approximately by a very simple linear equation. So that means that the frequency change is proportional to theta. And the theta is related by the displacement of x by this following equation. We find that if we assume that the movement of the target is small, then the change in the frequency is approximately proportional to the displacement. So this kind of radar has the following advantage. First, it has a very high sensitivity. It can detect a very tiny movement, like a displacement of 1 out of 1,000 of wavelength. And it has a low circuit complexity. You can see that it only consists of a transceiver and also an oscillator and a frequency demodulator. And it also has a very good noise or interference immunity. Why it has a very excellent noise or interference immunity? Because we have a very high Q resonator here, and it has a very narrow bandwidth. So that means that it doesn't respond to any interference that outside its bandwidth. So that is why it can eliminate the influence of noise and other interference. But the major drawback of this kind of radar is that if we look once again the Adler's equation, we find that the frequency change is not actually a linear function of the phase difference theta. It actually the psi function of theta. And as we know, the psi function is a nonlinear function. So that means that if you want to detect a large movement, a large displacement, you will find that the trajectory of the target object will detect the detected trajectory will have some certain distortion. Here is the psi function. You can see here. If we want to detect a movement near these 2 points, we find that if we have some variation of the phase due to the object movement, but we can see here the frequency maintain almost constant. So that means that we cannot detect any movement near these 2 points. So the best detection point will be here or here, because you can see the curve near these 2 points. They are almost a straight line. So that means that in this very small region, the function becomes almost linear. So that means that this kind of radar has very limited application, because we have to place the target object at a point at the initial position that has a phase difference almost 0, and also we have to restrict its displacement in a very small region. We can see here, this phase pi is about a displacement of a quarter wavelength. So that means that any movement larger than a quarter wavelength, then you will experience some serious distortion because you went through the null point and that do not have any radar output signal at these 2 points. So this kind of distortion due to the nonlinearity between the Doppler phase shift and also the frequency change was seriously limited its application. So how do we solve this problem? There is a naive solution here. How about we move our radar in synchrony with the target? If the target moves right, our radar also moves right. If our target moves left, our radar moves left. If we can have a synchrony motion, then of course the local movement will be equal to the target movement. But how do we synchronize their motion? We can observe the phase difference between the transmitted signal and also the returned echo signal. Or maybe we can observe the oscillation frequency of our oscillator. If our oscillator has an oscillation frequency very almost identical to its free rounding frequency or the nature frequency of the resonator, then we will know that the phase difference between these two signals is almost zero. So, but I think that most people would think this is a bad idea. It sounds like a very stupid solution, but if we think for a moment, if we can electronically synchronize the motion of these two, then maybe it can automatically extract the motion of the target. But up to now, we still don't know how to synchronize the motion of these two. Here is a method. Here is a method I proposed. Maybe we can insert a delay in the receiver of the return echo here. If we can tune this delay, then it is equal to electronically move the radar. So we tune this delay, and until that the demodulator output here, the demodulator output signal reflect how much the deviation of the oscillation frequency from its free rounding frequency. So we can observe this demodulator output. If the demodulator output is large, that means that we have a large phase difference between these two signals. If the demodulator output signal is small, that means that we have almost in phase of these two signals. So we can try to tune this delay to regulate the phase difference between these two signals to almost zero. or other desirable constant. So once we can do this, then you will find that this tunable delay will have a waveform very similar to the movement of the target. So that means that if we directly show the waveform of the delay signal on our screen, then we can see the trajectory of the target object with some proportion. So that is my idea. So let's see how do we design this controller. So the core design of this is a PI controller here. We have to design a PI controller to regulate the phase difference between these two signals by observing the oscillation frequency. So before we design this PI controller, we have to model our plane first. This is a small signal model here. This is our the variation of a tunable delay, and also we have the round trip travel time of our propagating wave D. So here the plane model, the input of the plane model is this time variation, and the output is the demodulation output. We know that the demodulation output is almost proportional to the frequency deviation or the frequency change in oscillation frequency. So here we can see the model is quite simple. It includes the demodulator filter. The demodulator filter is here. And also it has a delay. This is a Laplace domain delay. And its delay time is 1/8 t. T is the period, the period of the free running oscillation frequency, T. Okay, so this is a quarter period of delay. And then we can take a look at the gain of the plane. And the gain of the plane here will vary with theta. That means that different phase theta we will have different gain. If we take a look at a graph of the gain versus theta, we will find a curve like this. At different operating point, we will have different gain, but we find that we have a almost flat region. It's at it's at the theta equals almost pi. In this region near theta equals pi, we have a maximally flat gain here. So once we look at this the model of the plane, we cannot help ask a question. What is the better operating point? We know that we try to operate the radar, the self-injection lock radar in its linear region, and we also know that the linear region is near maybe theta equals 0 here, or theta equals pi. The linear region is either near the theta equals 0 or theta equals pi. But if we look at the plane gain here, we would prefer to operate at theta equals pi because it has a almost constant gain near this region. How about another preferred point, theta equals 0? The theta equals 0 has a very extremely small region that has a constant gain. Once it deviate from this 0, we find that its gain drop very quickly. So that in this observation, we will try to operate the radar at this point, theta equals pi. So if we choose to operate at theta equals pi, we find that the plane model can be simplified as this one. We have this to be demodulation filter, and this delay, and we have a gain k, and k equals the resonator bandwidth in hertz. So once we have the model of the plane, and also we choose the best operating point, the remaining task is to design a controller. So here is the model, the plane model, but we still want to simplify this model further. Usually the demodulation filter has a high order. It is a high order filter, but we approximate that demodulation filter by a first order filter. We will use a first order low pass filter to replace demodulation filter F. So this is our first order simplification model. Okay, and we try to design a PI controller to stabilize this plane, and this is a very simple choice of the proportional gain and also the integration gain Ki and Kp. The Ki is choose to be bandwidth. We set a control bandwidth omega BW and divided by K. Remember that K equals the resonator bandwidth. And Kp, the proportional gain, is set equal to the Ki divided by omega C. And omega C is the cutoff frequency of the demodulation filter. We use a first order filter to approximate a high order filter with the same cutoff frequency. So that is a very easy to choose the controller parameter Ki and Kp. And of course, here we have a free parameter omega BW. Omega BW is quite similar to the control bandwidth. We can set the control bandwidth and to see the desirable, to see the stability margin. And we can check the gain margin, and we can check the phase margin to see if we have enough stability margin. Here is an example we use a 40 kilohertz ultrasonic transducer. And so that means that our oscillator should have a free running oscillation frequency at exactly 40 kilohertz. So here we design a resonator. It has a natural frequency at 40 kilohertz, and we choose the quality factor equals 25. It is equivalent to have a bandwidth of 1.6 kilohertz. And the demodulation filter, we design a fourth order demodulating filter, and the cutoff frequency is about 12 kilohertz. And in this example, we set the control bandwidth equal to about 3.82 kilohertz. And they will give us a gain margin about 2.5 and a phase margin about 61 degrees. The corresponding, the associated PI controller gain is here. Here is the circuit that implement this radar. Once again, we choose the 40 kilohertz transducer, and here we can see we use a very simple 4-bridge Class D amplifier to drive this ultrasonic transmitter. And here is our ultrasonic receiver, and this is an instrumentation amplifier. And here we have a comparator. It converts this sine wave into a square wave, sent into this FPGA. And here, the output of the radar, we said here, we send the tunable delay as the radar output. We send it out to display it on the screen. Okay, so you can see here, this is a very simple low-pass filter. They try to convert the PWM signal into a continuous wave. These are some of our experimental results. We try to produce, we use a linear actuator to produce harmonic motion. And we try to create a very small motion with peak-to-peak 20 micrometer displacement. And we also produce a large displacement. Here you can see the radar output waveform. You can see here, this is the smallest displacement we can detect from our radar, because you can see here it almost covered by the small noise here. So if the displacement get even smaller, then maybe it will buried under this noise. Here we can see the radar output for the large movement. You can see here the radar output show an almost sinusoidal waveform with exactly 120 millimeters displacement. that is exactly the motion we produce by the linear actuator. So on the right here, we can see here the total harmonic distortion analysis for different radar output to detect different harmonic motion. For a very small motion here, we have a quite large distortion, but once the motion higher than 0.1 millimeter displacement, you can see here the distortion is very small. So that means that our radar has can detect a large movement without with a very high linearity. So you can see here the largest movement we can detect is about 120 millimeter. That is approximately equal to about 15 wavelength of this 40 kilohertz radar. We try to use this radar to detect the chest movement of a human being. We want to see if we can find our heart rate or breathing rate from the chest movement. And this is the waveform of the radar output. From the waveform of the radar output, we can find a large movement here. This movement is because our body, even we sit on the chair, we still may have some random movement of our body. So this is our random movement of our body. And we can also see two almost periodic signals in this chest movement. One is here. This is the breathing. And another even higher frequency rhythm is here. Very small oscillation here. This is our heartbeat. Our heartbeat creates a very small chest movement. So if we take the FMT to look at the spectrum of the radar output, we will find that this low frequency, high energy is our body low frequency random movement. And this is our breathing. And this is our heartbeat. Okay, now, how about this? This is the harmonic of our breathing. Same here. This is the harmonics of our heartbeat. So we can see here from this spectrum, we know that the breathing rate is about 14 breaths per minute, and the heart rate is 83 beats per minute. So from this application, we know that our radar has a very high sensitivity. Also, it has a high linearity. If we do not have a very wide linear region, then possibly we cannot. All these heartbeat movement or the breathing movement will totally buried under the random movement of our body. And I'm sorry, maybe I have to connect the power supply. Okay. Because my battery of the laptop almost stay out. Okay, let's do some comparison with some of the popular method that can also try to solve the nonlinearity of the radar problem. So the first very popular method is arctangent demodulation. This method is based on quadrature phase detection. It detects the cosine component of the phase and also the sine component of the phase, and we apply the arctangent to the ratio of the sine to cosine. Then, so in this way, we can demodulate the angle from the radar signal. And of course, the angle is a periodic function. So we have to unwrap the angle to extract the motion of the target. So this method is effective to widen the sensing range of the radar, but it has some drawback. This method is very sensitive to the circuit imperfection, including DC offset or quadrature channel imbalance, because it have to demodulate two channels of signal. So another drawback is that you can see in comparison with our method, you will find that our method only need to demodulate one signal. We do FM demodulation for one signal, but it has to do the demodulation of two signals. Also, it have to do wrapping to get the exact trajectory of the target movement. Another method is phase tracking demodulation. And phase tracking demodulation method is very similar to ours. It also use the feedback to keep the phase between the transmitted signal and the received echo signal almost constant. It tried to maintain a fixed number of wavelength of propagation between the radar and moving target. So that means that the phase tracking method use exactly the same methodology as us, because we all try to move our radar in synchrony with our target. But the only difference is that how do we synchronize the motion? Our method tries to tune the delay of our received echo signal. But here, it used the fixed log loop, PLL, the fixed log loop. It tried to use the fixed log loop to change the transmitted frequency. It tried to change the frequency of the oscillator. So that is the major difference from ours. We try to keep the same oscillation frequency, but it tried to vary the oscillation frequency in order to keep the effective wavelength of the distance almost constant. But compared to our method, the major drawback for the phase tracking demodulation is that since it tried to change the frequency of the propagating wave. It will limited by the frequency, the range of the frequency that it can change will be limited by the bandwidth of the transceiver. We know that in almost all cases, we have some bandwidth limitation of our transceiver. So that means that once your transceiver cannot operate it in a very wide bandwidth, then actually this method cannot detect a wide enough range of the motion. So here we list some pros and cons of our method with the other two methods. The linear sensing range, our method have a very good, very wide linear sensing range. The same is for the arctangent demodulation skin. But the phase tracking Doppler radar usually only have maybe double wavelength of the displacement. It very seldom for the phase tracking radar that have a linear sense range wider than 2 wavelengths. And the sensitivity to the circuit nonlinearity, our method is good. It almost immune to the circuit imperfection. How about the phase tracking radar? Because these two methods all use the feedback scheme. We know that the best about the feedback is it can compensate any imperfection of the circuit. So that is why these two methods have a very insensitive to very low sensitivity to the circuit imperfection. But for the arctangent demodulation, because it is a open loop demodulation method, it was affected by the circuit DC offset and also the quadrature channel imbalance. So that is its major drawback. About the algorithm computation simplicity, our method is simple because we only have one demodulator for one channel of signal and one feedback loop. The same is for the phase tracking method, but for arctangent demodulation, it requires 2 channels of demodulation. Also, it have to perform arctangent. It also have to perform wrapping. Here is my conclusion. This method try to use a feedback scheme for demodulation. It greatly enhanced the linearity of the self-injection lock radar. Also, that it preserved the high sensitivity of the self-injection lock radar. And another advantage is that since it uses feedback demodulation scheme, it is very insensitive to the circuit imperfection. So that is some conclusion of our radar. And here are some more reference, including these two methods. I try to make a comparison with ours method. Thank you for your attention. I hope everybody will like this report as I do. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Yu. It was a nice presentation. Okay, we have 5 minutes for discussion Is there any question? Okay, Dr. Astria.
Thank you very much,
Please.
Dr. Ardiono. Very interesting work, Professor Yu.
Thank you.
I'm actually reading your paper right now and have some questions. Oh yeah,
Okay.
Thank you for showing the circuit. So it's interesting that although most of your explanations were done, you don't just make a distinction between analog or digital, but your implementation is clearly digital.
Yes.
So that is my first question. Were there any considerations? And I'm seeing that you chose a low frequency for the PID controller and a high frequency for the tunable delay. What is the impact of the clocking scheme towards your design? That's my first question. And my second question is the output of this is from the PWM and to the LPF. Can you explain a bit more about the PWM? Is it just a simple PWM and the low pass filter is a single third order low pass filter, or does it? My point is for that low pass filter in the output, will it affect in terms of the phase response? Will it affect also the overall system? Those are my two questions. Thank you very much.
Okay. The first is about why I put most algorithm on FPGA. Why I try to digitize almost algorithm on FPGA is that because if we have a digital control instead of analog control, it will be more easy for us to adjust some parameter of our controller. And the second is that because all these implementation, including the tunable delay, including the oscillator, including the demodulator, including this controller, are implemented digitally on FPGA. That means that they do not have some circuit nonlinearity, so that it will avoid some problem of the nonlinearity or imperfection that comes from the implementation using the analog circuit, because we know that if we try to implement all of this using the analog circuit, we will find that the component variation will seriously affect all these values. So if we can convert all algorithm into this digital version, then all these errors are controlled by us, because we know how much we have the quantization error, and we know how many bits we use to represent a signal. So all the error are controlled by us, but not by some component variation. So this is the first answer. I try to explain why I put almost a circuit on this digital FPGA. The second is that why I use a high frequency clock for the tunable delay, but use a low frequency clock for the controller. Because the first one, we try to have a very high resolution for the tunable delay. Here I use a shift register for the tunable delay. So that means that we have to have a very high clock. Higher clock means lower space of the delay. So that means that we have a very high resolution in delay. And why I use a low frequency clock. We have a low sample rate for this PI controller, because that we know that all control systems have a limited bandwidth. If we try to implement a low frequency controller using a high frequency clock, I think that they will produce some trouble. The first is that you use a higher clock rate, then that means that it will consume more power on FPGA. And another trouble is that since it has a very limited bandwidth, but you use a very high clock rate to calculate the controller signal, controller flows. In this case is the delay, T. You will find that in such a high clock rate, but since the bandwidth of the controller is low, that means almost all sample signal has a almost constant level. So I don't think it is necessary to use a high clock rate. It just repeat the same task, but your output doesn't change too much for such a high clock rate. So that is why I choose to lower the sample rate. And for the last question, because we know that FPGA do not have a digital to analog converter in the chip, on the chip. So the easiest way to convert a digital signal to an analog one is to use pulse width modulation. We try to vary the pulse width and send this output signal through the digital output. Here I use a low pass filter. The low pass filter is here. You can see here. This is a low pass filter. This is an amplifier, a non-inverting amplifier. And this is a very simple RC filter. And this is a 7-key low-pass filter, second order 7-key low-pass filter. So combine these two circuits, we have third order low-pass filter. And the cutoff frequency is at about 1.5 kilohertz. So that are my answer to your question. I don't know if I answered your question.
Very clearly. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you. Can I give applause for Professor?
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay. For further discussion, maybe who interested to this research, maybe you can contact directly to Professor Yu by email or other media. So, yeah. Again, thank you very much, Professor Yu, for your
thank you, everyone
today, and also thank you very much for all participants for your kindness today. Join this session, two speakers, Professor Yu and Dr. Adi. So I should call the committee to next agenda. Please, I retune this agenda to committee. Thank you very much.